With the miniature, if you can call this massive force of terror such a thing, now fully assembled, we make a visit to the stove where I aim to alter the positions of the legs. They are all bunched together and need to be splayed out, and to do so I bring a pot of water nearly to a boil and dip the legs in for about 10 to 15 seconds. Then I hold the pieces in place until it cools. A smart person would use a large vat of ice water to dip the miniature into to speed this process, but my wife was sleeping at this time and I need to live, so I chose a path where I can work in silence. With the legs formed in place, I then head to my airbrushing station and prime it with gloss black before spraying in some vibrant blue to establish the wild patterning. Purple is also added to bring some additional color to the abdomen and underside of the body. I then mix together some lighter blues and add spot highlights, but making sure to leave the previous blue visible, or at least I try to, as I don't airbrush as much as I should and control is still something that I'm learning. I add some pure white and vibrant yellow to some of the segmented joints on the legs with a few sprays each, and then bring back a little more purple on the abdomen before heading inside. The time to unbox, clean up, and assemble the miniature took me roughly 20 minutes, and all the airbrush work was right at 30 minutes, not including the time it took for me to clean the airbrush afterwards. I immediately hit this big monstrous thing with a black oil wash and let it sit for an hour before coming back with makeup sponges lightly dampened with mineral spirits to slowly and gently wipe at it to remove the oil not settled in the crevices. I found that it helps to remove enough of the mineral spirits from the sponge so that when you press it against your finger, no liquid runs free. Otherwise it'll get down into and remove the oil that is settled in the nooks and crannies, and that's what you want to leave behind. The oil wash work was less than 10 minutes, not including the hour I had to let it dry. After letting it sit for another 10 minutes to allow the mineral spirits to fully evaporate, I start adding some highlights with the brush. I create 3 increasingly brighter highlights for the purple areas that were airbrushed and apply these as basic layers. I try to add these in small hatching lines following the grain, if you will, of the body and reducing the area covered with each brighter highlight. I then repeat the same process for the yellow and blue areas of the body, building the highlights towards the top of these areas or where the light would reach the most. With most of the highlights finished, I then come back with a matte black and add shadows around the spider's many talons, which is a horde concept in itself. and in between the segments and joints around the body, before using the same black to fully black out the talons, fangs, chelicere or the beak thing, and its many eyes. The white parts only received one highlight of titanium white, and I also add a small dot of this as a reflection to each of the eyes. I then add gloss varnish to the eyes to give them a little extra shine. For the talons, I was originally going to do a bone color or grays for highlights, but I decided that it would look out of place, and instead I used the violet that's concentrated mostly in the center of the body, and use the same 3 shades that are already on my palette. I paint the first highlight as hatching lines starting from the connected end of the talon and end about halfway out. What I imagined was the talons are purple as they grow, but are faded to black from use, grime, and time. The subsequent 2 highlights will be much the same, covering less area, and applied as thinner lines. I finished the talons off with a glaze of violet to help tone down any areas that I got too bright or were harsh with the transition, before turning to the base. All of this brushwork is where most of the time went into this project, taking roughly 2.5 hours. This is a 6-inch acrylic base by Liquitex. I don't really like these bases as they're solid acrylic and they are very smooth, so you have to rough them up with sandpaper to get anything, including paint, to stick. They're also very expensive for what they are, but I have ordered a few in the past and I'm going to use what I have. I glue on some rocks and add some lunar desert texture paste from AK Interactive, leaving some areas uncovered. In these empty spaces, I then add AK Interactive's Crackle Effect paste to vary the look of the earth and then sprinkle on some smaller rocks while everything is still wet. I run back out to my airbrush booth and prime it with black, and then add some highlights of grays to brighten it up. Back inside, I slap some of Army Painter's dark tone wash all over the base and let it dry. I hit it with a couple of highlights of dry brushed gray to finish it off. At least so I thought. I felt the base was a little lackluster and needed something more, especially considering its massive diameter. I thought about glowing mushrooms and decided on 3D printing some stalagmites instead and then glued them on. To better integrate them to the cave floor, I add some texture paste around the base and then lightly coat them with it. Then I wash and highlight them in the same manner that I did the rest of the base. Altogether, the base work was about 30 minutes, not including the 7 hours it took for the 3D printed stalagmites to finish. Finally, I black out the base and combine the two before I get to call it a night. And this is what I ended up with. Now, I know what you're not thinking. You're not thinking, Jim, you painted the last 2 spider videos this month after real spiders copying their patterns. Why didn't you do the same with this one instead of making up some crazy impossible pattern that could only occur in the underdark hives of Menzoberranzan? But if you had thought that question, then the joke is on you, because this son of a bitch walks this earth under the genus Poecilotheria metallica, and as you watch this, it is but a mere handspan from touching the back of your neck. For lessons learned, this is one of the single largest miniatures that I've painted to date, but definitely was the most awkward to paint, due to the many legs and having to constantly reposition it in every angle conceivable. If I had to paint this miniature again, I'd definitely have removed the legs after the boiling and airbrush work to make the brush stages significantly easier and faster. Also, you can't really see it now that it's attached to the base, but I should have filled the massive void in the bottom of its abdomen with some wads of tinfoil and then sculpted a proper bottom, for the experience of sculpting if nothing else. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or were inspired to start or expand your own collection of enormous terrors. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can support this channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.